If you go to Granville Island here, salmon is from here and oysters are from here. Everything else, all the fish on sale in this Granville Island fish market is imported. Imported from Norway, imported from New Zealand, imported from God knows where. The supply is not anymore local.
That's Dr. Daniel Pauly, professor of marine biology at the University of British Columbia and the leading expert on the state of the world's fisheries. He's our guest on this episode of Explore, a Canadian Geographic podcast. I'm your host, David McGuffin. Welcome to all you explorers out there, armchair and in motion. Today, we're very lucky to be talking to Daniel Pauly. Fish is the last wild catch, the last animal food source that we hunt and eat en masse from the wild. But Daniel Pauly warns that we are rapidly approaching the end of that, the end of fish, because of industrial fishing methods, because of government subsidies of multinational fishing operations, and all of that now compounded by climate change. The French-born Canadian marine biologist has dedicated his long and award-winning career to improving the data that's used to understand global marine stocks. This is the principal aim of the Sea Around Us initiative that he helped to found at UBC. More accurate data helps better pinpoint where fisheries are collapsing and how best to protect them, with ocean reserves, government regulation, and a shift from industrial fishing back to smaller-scale traditional inshore fishing. We discuss all that and what lessons have and have not been learned in the collapse of Newfoundland's once thriving cod fishery. You'll hear a lot of criticism from Daniel Pauly about the DFO in this talk. That's the acronym for the Canadian Department of Fisheries and Oceans. So, without further ado, here's Daniel Pauly. So, Dr. Daniel Pauly, thank you so much for coming on Canadian Geographic's Explore podcast.
Yeah, it's my pleasure too.
Great. I want to start with sort of a big and perhaps broad question, just about the overall state of our fisheries in Canada and globally, and also this concept you have that we're sort of cascading towards an end of fish if we continue using these industrial fishing methods that we use around the world. And so how would you just give us the sort of the state of our fisheries?
Basically, fisheries, and I will start generalizing and then go to Canada. Fisheries have an old history, probably thousands of years. But a new era began in 1880 when steam trawlers were deployed around the British Isles. Because for the first time, not the wind and not rowing became the means of moving gear, but it was fossil energy. And it was possible then to punch into marine ecosystem with a force that never existed before. And that mode of fishing with using fossil energy was so strong that within a decade or two, the fish in coastal waters of Britain were literally gone, and they had to go further offshore. Thus began an expansion which finished about in the 90s, in the end of the 20th century. Because since then, the industrialized countries have always tried to expand when the stocks that they exploited became decimated. They expanded geographically. And this expansion brought us to Africa, to the Southern Ocean, and each country, Japan, France, Germany, and all of them participated in this monstrous effort. Russia. And some of them abandoned it at some point because they couldn't get a young man to get 6 months on a boat, like in Japan. They now buy the fish to a large extent instead of go catch them. But some other countries continued, Russia, Spain, with heavily subsidized fisheries. And other countries got into the game. China is an example, started in 1985 to deploy distant water fleet. This is like a steamroller that went on resources everywhere. And that continues only because it is driven by subsidies. Essentially, you can fish in an area where nature is telling you, stop fishing. There's no more fish, you cannot make money. But if you get subsidies, you can block this voice that nature tells you, and you can continue operating. And this distant water fleet are all heavily subsidized. Now let's get back to Canada. How did it specifically manifest itself, this expansion thing? Well, the founding of Canada is structured around Europeans coming, including to fish for cod. And from 1500 about to the beginning of the 20th century, this fishing for cod was mainly driven by Britain and France and other countries, but mainly these two. Then a local fishery using traps established itself. And then starting in the 50s, and especially in the 60s, the trawlers came, the monster trawlers from Europe, and Eastern Europe, Western Europe. And I was on board of one in 73, the first time I came to Canada. And it was like a monstrous, not a house, but a city block on the dragonet, where you could put comfortably 4 or 5 jumbo jet. And we fished in 1 kilometer depth. And in 1 kilometer depth, fish that they would never have been caught because earlier fishing method could not reach there. So we reached into the inner sanctum of a bank instead of going to the teller, getting interest on our capital. We reached in the inner sanctum of the bank and went after the capital. And basically a stock that could produce about 100 to 200,000 tons a year, and was reduced to almost nothing in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and so the fishery had to be closed. Now it produced 10,000 tons, 5,000 tons. It has a minimal size. Now, did the fishery management agency, in this case the DFO, rebuild that stock? No. It went into something else, into shrimp. The things that the cod had previously eaten and which now blossom, shrimp and crabs and things. And that is a form of expansion, because you expand into new species, the new species that become available because the old species are gone.
I mean, I want to get back to the Newfoundland cod fishery itself, because I think that's fascinating. But you talk about subsidies and the impact of subsidies, and I'm just wondering if that's the main culprit. How do we work with governments to end that? And are we seeing examples of that happening anywhere?
Well, basically, if you cannot make money with the bounty that nature produces, something is wrong with your operation. And among other things, because you have fished too much. So you stop fishing. And when I was a student, I was told so. I was told that fisheries auto-regulate, because a fishery will stop exploiting a stock that is overexploited, that gives you a low catch per day or low catch per hour. And it should be like that. But the moment you give subsidies, you allow this signal that nature gives you to be overridden, to be overheard. So you can make money fishing for subsidies. The subsidy maintain you fishing, and then whatever you catch, if you catch anything, you can sell in and make a little bit of money. But actually, you're fishing for subsidies, and these subsidies can take different forms. They are cheaper fuel, they are cheaper loan on purchasing the boats, they are cheaper insurance policies, and so on. And they also can be slavery on board that is tolerated or encouraged by your government. Some government, not necessarily Canada, encourage this, but Thailand is a case in point, and Taiwan. They reduce the cost of the crew. That is a subsidy, and they do pirate operation on the side, illegal fishing. All of this are acting like subsidies. Now, getting back to subsidies, in Canada, the small-scale fishers are subsidized by getting an insurance if they fish, I think, 10 weeks. Then the rest of the year, they get insurance.
It's like unemployment insurance.
That is a form of subsidization. I should add that it is not the small-scale fishers that have destroyed the fishery, but the subsidies encourage them to continue being there and to continue getting at the resource every time it rebuilds itself. So it created a situation where you cannot wait to rebuild the stock. You could not wait. And from 92 on, the fishery, there was a moratorium. Every time a few cod found themselves in a bay, a so-called sentinel fishery was opened. This prevented the province from moving away from cod fishing altogether, which it should have done until the stock was rebuilt. We have just published a paper showing that if the fishing pressure had been maintained at the level it was in the 80s, Canada would still have this big stock. The catch would be about 200,000 tons per year. It would be sustainable. 200,000 tons per year. Now it's 1/10 or 1/20th of that at best. So the stocks have not been rebuilt.
And this is off Newfoundland?
Essentially, no. Eastern Canada altogether. We have not differentiated between the different stocks. But there is another point that is important. They were, to understand what happened to the stock, there were two fisheries essentially. One fishery by small-scale fishers from fishing from output, and they don't get far because this is day fishing, right? So they can go only, 50 kilometers or so, and come back. So they were all around Newfoundland and along Labrador. And they noted that they couldn't catch cod anymore because they couldn't reach the cod that were there. The remaining cod were collecting themselves in one of the other region of that broader region. The trawlers could get to this concentration. So the DFO, by deciding to track only the trawlers, tracked what seemed to be an abundance. But actually, what the small-scale fishers were observing is that the distribution was contracting itself onto a few thousand tons of fish. And the decision to not listen to the small-scale fishers is a widespread decision that in all countries it is. Because the catching power of the trawlers generates huge revenue, and it generates huge debts because you buy this boat, and this translates into political capital. And so the fleet operator, the owner of a big fleet, can speak to the minister, whereas the individual small-scale fishers cannot. And they can speak only in confrontational form. They will demonstrate and stuff. So the process known as industry captures works fully in fisheries, that the big owners of fleet can convince the minister that fisheries, it's them. And so everybody listens to them, and in this case use the data that they provide, the trawlers, and they could show that the catch of trawlers was maintained because they could follow the fish where they were. And the small-scale fishers could not follow them because they have a radius that was limited.
So how do you break that cycle, though? Like, how do we, let's say we make you the global minister of fisheries for the entire world. How do you do it?
I would have to talk with the other ministers in agriculture, in reselling, the trade and so on, because we would have to make a coalition, because this process of favoring the big guys against the small guys is widespread everywhere. It doesn't need a special fisheries explanation. You have it everywhere. The big Walmart or big shop owners and a small shop that sells things on a corner have also a differential access to political. I'm not talking about corruption, incidentally. I'm not talking about corruption. Industry captures function without corruption. It functions also with, but industry captures takes place. It takes place because of a community of expression, a community of goals. For example, DFO in the West Coast and I think on the East Coast also wants to encourage concentration in a fishery because they say it's easier to manage. In other words, instead of having 100 cats to herd, you have one tiger. But the tiger, you can't ride it. That's the point, right? So we don't want to herd cat. We have a few tigers. But then the tigers run you. You cannot run them.
It sounds like what you're saying, too. Part of the trouble with change, obviously, is the human factor, and there's been people communities fishing for hundreds and hundreds of years, and it's a way of life. And how do you maintain that way of life, or how do you end that way of life? But it sounds like that's not even it, because in effect, they've already ended that way of life by moving to big industrial fishing anyway.
Yeah, it could have been maintained, that way of life, but it's not compatible with monster boats that can make the catch that you make in a year in 2 hours. There is no relationship. So basically, you cannot have a happy coexistence of big and small operators. The population of cod that was accessible to down to 50 meters with traps and stuff was a sustainable part of the population. If you like the cod that were stupid enough to come near the surface to be caught, that stuff could have been exploited for hundreds of years. It had been exploited for hundreds of years before by vessels fishing with lines and dories, right? But no, it was decided we will not work with a teller in a bank. We will go to the treasure chest. We go to the inner sanctum. And because we can take out everything that we want, any fish stock that we want from anywhere in the world, there is no place that we cannot go. Before, there was the winter. It was depth. It was cold. It was distance from the shore. All of these things were limiting factor. Now there is no limiting factors, none whatsoever. And even before, we had also the market. If you come up with too many fish at the same time, they will rot because you could do that. Now we have infinite market for all purpose, because you can freeze the catch and you can sell them in countries that have insatiable appetite for fish.
Mm-hmm. So if you were to looking forward, if we continue on this path, when will we stop having wild fish on our tables?
But we have already stopped having wild fish.
No way. Explain that.
Imagine the Brits. Before, they would have, fish and chips and stuff. They don't have fish and chips the way they think they do. Before it was cod, and that is not anymore available. Then it was cod-like fish. It also is not available. And now I don't know what they get when they offer that. It's certainly not cod, and it's certainly not any other white fish. It's probably some concoction of fish from elsewhere that are pressed into shape. You know surimi?
No.
Surimi is crab flesh with K that is done by spraying skeleton of fish that you have removed the fillet of to get the last fibers of meat, protein, and then you press it together and you offer as fake crab meat. So that is already the fish that you get. That's what you eat. I have seen my first surimi in France. It is
crazy. Yeah.
In the fish market, or the immense wet market that provides fish in France to Paris. I have one time visited it at 3 o'clock in the morning, 4 o'clock, and there was one cod in the box. The rest were fish, groupers, and beautiful, colorful fish from the Indian Ocean. So what we have in the same thing in Spanish markets, I have seen. The supply is not anymore local. Same thing if you go to Granville Island here. It's a beautiful place, artistic. There is all kind of alternative shops selling little things that smell good, and you will also find fishmongers. Now, salmon is from here, and oysters are from here. Everything else, all the fish on sale in this Granville Island fish market is imported from Norway, imported from New Zealand, imported from God knows where. 50 years ago, you could have gotten fish from the Georgia Strait or the Pacific. So that is the point. Your question implies that something will happen. Well, something has already happened, but we adapt to it, and therefore we don't notice. lots of the fish we eat also comes from aquaculture. Catfish in the US, this horrible salmon that we get from BC, from Scotland, from Chile, and so on. And so we think the transition has already happened.
This gets to the thing you're quite famous for, too. It's just shifting baselines, right? Which we think we're doing fine, but not if you compare to 50 years ago. But then if you compare 50 to 100. Can you explain what that concept is and how that plays into this?
Well, basically, shifting baseline is I think, a good adaptation that early humans had of not remembering too much of the past. Because earlier group of humans, when they reach a certain critical size, somebody had to leave and go somewhere else. And they did. And that's how we evolved in Africa. And then we moved all the way to Australia, Asia, Europe, and so on, and ended up also in Americas. Basically, we had to make new homes all the time. And there would have been no point remembering either physiologically or culturally too much of the past, because we could never adapt. And we can see, we expect actually, to take a contemporary example, we expect immigrants to work on abandoning the habits of the past, of the home country, because they live now in Canada. And their children do that. That is shifting baseline. This is a positive aspect of it. Now, the negative aspect of it is that if one of our activity or our activities in general have a negative impact on the environment, and it goes over several generations, we have a problem knowing the extent of this damage, because we tend to take seriously only the part that we can see, that we have lived. So a young person will set, so to say, like a microphone, themselves in terms of the biodiversity that they experience at the beginning of their conscious life. And then they will know the change. They become old and they know, when I was young, this and this was happening. But they do not recall what their parents' setting was. And their parents don't recall their grandparents. So, for example, young people that may be very aware, my student, for example, they don't know insect. We have no insects around. You can drive and there are no insects splashing on a windshield. I remember that, right? Insects splashing on a windshield. When you made a long trip, you had blood all over and wings all over the windshield. The student now, the young people now don't know that. And so they will never miss that time, or they will never use it as reference. And that is shifting baseline. It has positive effect. It helped us adapt. We are an extremely adaptable and successful species, probably because of it. But this adaptation is deadly when it comes to our impact on the environment, because we accept really what is unacceptable. And then you get into absurd situation where people will not use data from the past. We have just published a paper that shows that most stock assessments, so that is evaluation of fisheries, most are done with truncated data. There is some data that they have on the past that they don't use. And in the case of assessment of cod, the assessment are done without consideration of the catch that were done in the 16th and 17th century. They use 20 years, 30 years of data. And 30 years ago, the stock had already collapsed. So what meaningful inference can you draw from a collapsed stock? It would be like if the Serengeti without elephant, without lions, and people would study the interaction of rabbits and termites and mice on the Serengeti, because and they would not know that the big animal had lived there.
Right. So what I'm trying to hear from you, and I'm not sure I do, is a sense of change happening. And do you see any change happening, or are we, because of these shifting baselines and everything else, are we still sort of trapped in this cycle?
You mean the change is happening, but not in our head or economic structure? Yeah, that's the point. But I would say the measure of all things should be our recognition that we have to do something as a species, in fact, about global warming, and if we don't tackle that, then everything else become a footnote, and we're not tackling that. You will see Canada, for example, doesn't talk seriously about the impossibility of being a petrostate. Canada conceives itself as a liberal petrostate. That's not possible. You cannot have a progressive agenda on the climate and be a petrostate. And the sacrifice that Alberta and our economy would have to experience, not sacrifice, but adjustment. Nobody at present can conceive of them. In the science, we have an idea, and the best scientific mind in the world, they are plans to decarbonize our economy, and it could be done without living standard being affected, actually. But waste would have to be avoided. You could not give subsidies to fossil fuel companies and so on. And no politician has the courage, or in fact, it might be impossible in democracies to do it. And in non-democracies, the fossil fuel would have, they say, even more. So no, I don't think. I think we're in a serious mind, and I think we are in a serious mind because of shifting baseline. Because when I was a kid, also, you never would have people arguing against vaccination. People got polio in God's name, and vaccination was perceived as what it was, which is a miracle that solves giant problems. Well, now we have anti-vaxxers, and which we didn't have before, and the change in our heads are difficult, and in our political system, the inertia is such that we might not get the curve before serious damage is done, and we have survived the heat wave here, but the next ones, because there will be next ones, may have more than 600 dead in BC, and the next ones. Can you imagine the heat wave, and then they still talk about the tar sands? You know, they still think that that they have a future. And we have a heat wave in Canada, the highest temperature ever. There is no really understanding of what's happening. I don't think that our population also can understand that. And I'm not saying that as an elitist, but as a person who understands that when you are working 10 hours or 8 hours a day, maybe on 2 jobs because you need to make end meet, you have other problems, and listening to the scientists telling you that that we need to decarbonize the economy. But then who is in charge of doing that? Who is in charge of listening to the scientists? The civil society, the NGO they do listen to that. But then one doesn't listen to the NGOs because the economy. I was in an economy task force for BC, and 2 years ago, and the representative of the forestry industry at the time was not aware of global warming and of what it could mean. At the time, the forests in California were burning. You know, all the way into Los Angeles. And I remember telling her, well, don't you think this will happen here? They have no contingency plan. Now everything is burning in BC, and that's it. Mm-hmm. Everything is burning, but it has no implication for what. I remember a gentleman saying, "Oh, but we are dealing with this. We have a carbon tax." That's magic thinking, right? They think that a carbon tax is solving the problem. And now we have election, and people are going to talk about the carbon tax, which does perfectly, absolutely nothing, except make things more expensive for some people. It will not have any effect whatsoever.
I mean, to look at the impact of climate change too, which you've talked certainly about the impact on land and many hundreds of dead are in British Columbia. But what are we seeing in terms of the impact on fish and fish stocks and where they are and where they're going to?
Fish are extremely sensitive to temperature change because they are not like us who maintain the same temperature, 37 degrees, that's it. And birds about 38, 40, that's it. Fish, their temperature changes with the temperature of the water. But if the temperature increases, they need more oxygen. So the breathing is accelerated when the temperature is high. On the other hand, there is less oxygen in the water when it's warm. So you have a decline of oxygen supply and you have an increase in demand. The result is that the fish will choke to death, especially if it's big, because the gills don't grow as fast as the volume, as the weight. Mm-hmm. So big fish have a problem. So you get two results. One result is that smaller fish, the fish are getting smaller. And we have written papers about that. The fish are gradually getting smaller that if the temperature increases. And the other change is that the fish are moving where the temperature is like it was before. Not where it is cooler, but like it was before. So in the northern hemisphere, it means moving toward the North Pole. And in Canada, it means that we are getting fish from California, and the fish that we have in BC, for example, they move to Alaska. And on the East Coast, it means that we get in Quebec and in the Maritimes, we get fish from New England and essentially and later from Florida, and our fish move north to the Baffin Bay and into the Arctic. That is a movement that is happening on a grand scale, and in Australia the opposite happens. In Sydney they get fish that were before in Brisbane and in Darwin and Townsville and so on. So that is these movements have been well described. They are happening and they're causing lots of problems everywhere because fish that were exploited by locally, they will be all of a sudden they are 50 kilometers further north or south, and then they are available to another group and or another country or another state, and it causes all kind of political problems and solving them, making new quota, new negotiation, new treaties takes time. By that time the fish are moved further, and it is a mess. And our fishery management are not at all prepared to deal with that complexity, because the tools that we have all imply that the stock is more or less in equilibrium, and we change the equilibrium by having a bigger biomass or smaller biomass. And if the stock are not in equilibrium but are in transit almost, nothing is true anymore, and the techniques that we use to assess the stock become enormously complicated, unreliable, and conflict-ridden.
So what gives you hope then?
Hope is not the operative word. If you think of Churchill in June 40, Dunkirk, and this period, the thing was not hope versus not hope, or optimism versus pessimism. The thing is, you're faced with something that you don't like, that shouldn't be. And so you do all you can against it, irrespective of whether you're going to make it or not, because the thing you don't want is really an abhorrent, awful thing. And you fight against it on the beaches, in the hills, everywhere, from the air, because this thing is not good, and it has to be fought, irrespective of whether you know whether you're going to win or not. Because one thing is clear, and I have been a witness of several political crises where a dictator, Marcos in the Philippines, where I've lived a long time there, seemed very strong, and then he was overthrown, and it was obvious that he would be overthrown a week later. He shrunk, and problems, once they're resolved, you ask yourself, why was it ever a problem? Think of smoking. When a few decades ago, I never smoked personally, but smoking appeared to be invincible. The companies, the smoking companies were huge. They were not going to be beaten, and now the ashtrays are gone. Yeah, and so problems appear to be monstrously big, and then they're resolved, and they were not that big. And so hope or optimism is not really the operating word, because you would be an opportunist to pick up course where you know you're going to win only.
Right.
We fight. Everybody fights, for example, for the environment, because we don't want to lose it. We don't want to lose the resource that we have. We don't want to lose, and that's what we fight for. And then if we manage, we manage, and if we don't, then everybody loses. But you don't ask yourself, what fight can I win, and involve yourself only in those.
You mentioned Churchill at the start there, and I also think of Nelson Mandela, who knew a thing or two about impossible situations, and he said everything's impossible until somebody does it.
And Mandela is another example that one could bring. That this regime would be brought down bloodlessly was unthinkable, and yet it happened. And then in retrospect, you say, "Oh,
It happened.
It required only somebody like Mandela." It is
Right.
It is wonderful. It is. If I get back to the word hope, this is the reason why one can fight, because things are not predictable, because one doesn't know, and because one doesn't know, one can not say it's not going to work.
So maybe the hopeful thing is that our society does produce these leaders through time. And
Yeah.
Before I let you go, I have one last question, and it's one I asked all my guests here, and it's about a favorite place you have in Canada. It might be like a happy place in your head, or somewhere you love to go visit, just makes you calm, or just some spot in Canada that gives you good feelings.
Well, okay, you will choose from several, 2 or 3.
Go for it.
One of my favorite places was Granville Island, which I mentioned before. I lived, the first years that I lived in Canada, I was all by myself. My wife was still in the Philippines. And I went there every Sunday, and they have different shops and stuff. And I read the New York Times, and I eat so-called ethnic food. And this was my favorite place for a long, long time. Another beautiful place is also in BC is the Stephenson Harbor, which is one little fishing town that we have close to Vancouver, and one cannery, the huge cannery, has salmon cannery, has been rehabilitated into a museum, and I go there very often with a student, pre-COVID time, and show them the exploitation of First Nation, of Chinese immigrant, of women that took place there, and how these things, horrible things, were overcome gradually. This is a beautiful place, and then we walk along the pathways that have been made for tourists, and there are people playing music in front of sign that says they shouldn't, and this is all very nice. These are beautiful places.
Beautiful. Those sound lovely. I'd love to see them both. And so, Daniel Pauly, thank you so much for coming on the Explore podcast.
You're very welcome.
I hope you enjoyed that conversation. If you did, you know the drill. Please rate, review, and subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. You can follow Canadian Geographic on social media @CanGeo. I'm on Twitter @MacGuffinDavid and on Instagram @David.MacGuffin. Thank you all so much for listening. And until next time, when we'll explore again, I'm David MacGuffin.
I think right now we're enjoying very much looking back at the Earth, and it's just a fantastic experience, and I just can't wait to get back and start telling people
We left
about it.
Simpson about June 10th with the fur brigade, consisting of a number of yacht boats, each manned by 10 voyageurs.
For us Inuit, it means that Inuit oral history is very strong.
And we flew low over every inch of the country that could be. We were hoping that he would fire at us.
I guess 160 dives or so. There are shrimp, fish swimming around outside. It's just fabulous here.
Well, I'm a first for Canada.